Yogaha Karmasu Kaushalam.
Hello students, my name is Ishan Shanolikar and today I will be talking about consumers, producers and market efficiency part 3, where we are going to look at market efficiency. We have seen consumer surplus and producer surplus are basic tools that economists use to study the welfare of buyers and sellers in the market. These tools can help us address a fundamental economic question. Is the allocation of resources determined by free markets desirable? So we are going to address this question. Before that, let us look at the objectives of this session. We first try to understand the meaning of free markets. Then we look at free market allocation of resources. Then we understand the meaning of market efficiency. Further, we develop the concept of total surplus. We move on to market equilibrium. And finally, we compare market efficiency to market failure. Let us start with free markets. Free markets refer to economic systems where the prices for goods and services are determined by interactions of individuals and businesses without government intervention or regulation. In free markets, first, prices are set based on supply and demand, reflecting the preferences and choices of buyers and sellers. Second, market participants compete freely, leading to efficiency, innovation, and lower prices for consumers. Next, individuals and businesses secure property rights, allowing them to own, use and transfer assets as they see fit. Further, consumers have the freedom to choose what to buy and producers have the freedom to produce and sell goods and services. Government intervention is limited to enforcing contracts, protecting property rights and ensuring competition rather than controlling prices and production decisions. Resources are allocated based on market forces, with factors like labor, capital and natural resources flowing to where they are most valued and can generate the highest returns. Moving on to the next part, that is allocation of resources by this aspect of free markets. First is the price mechanism. So free markets rely on the price mechanism to allocate resources efficiently. Prices adjust based on supply and demand forces, signaling producers to supply more of the demanded goods and signaling consumers to adjust their consumption patterns accordingly. The price mechanism ensures that resources flow towards areas of high demand where they are most valued by customers. Next point is supply and demand. In free markets, supply and demand interact to determine prices and quantities of goods and services. When demand increases for a product, prices rise, incentivizing producers to increase supply and meet the higher demand. Conversely, if demand decreases, the prices fall, signaling producers to reduce supply or relocate resources to more in-demand goods. Next, competition. So looking at the competition, free markets foster competition among producers, leading to efficiency improvements, innovation and lower price for consumers. Competitive pressures encourage producers to utilize resources more effectively, reduce costs and invest in research and development to stay ahead of the market. Next, resource mobility. Free markets allow resources to move freely between sectors based on changing demand and supply conditions. Factors of production such as labor, capital and raw materials can shift to industries with higher profitability or consumer demand, optimizing resource allocation. Further, consumer preference. Free markets respect consumer preferences and allocate resources according to consumer choices. Consumer sovereignty drives producers to produce goods and services that consumers value, leading to diverse range of products and service in the market. Next is a very important aspect called invisible hand. This concept of invisible hand was popularized by the economist Adam Smith. He suggests that individual self-interest in pursuing profit leads to collective benefit and efficient resource allocation in free markets, that is without government intervention. Producers driven by profit motives allocate resources efficiently by responding to market signals such as high demand or low demand without central planning, that is government intervention. The next point is flexibility and adaptability. Free markets are flexible and adaptable to changing economic conditions, technological advancements, and consumer preferences. Producers can quickly adjust to production level, prices, and product offerings based on market feedback, ensuring resource allocation remains dynamic and responsive. So, all these things hint towards changing the consumer surplus and producer surplus. This is what we are going to explore in the upcoming concepts or upcoming topics, and we are going to see how the concept of total surplus will be defined, where consumer surplus and producer surplus are a part of it and that can be enhanced. Now let us move to market efficiency. First aspect is efficient market pricing. In an efficient market, prices accurately reflect the true value of goods and services based on supply and demand dynamics, available information, and market competition. Meaning, the prices are determined based on how much is the demand and how much is the supply. That in turn means the producers know what kind of goods the consumer wants, and the consumers are ready to purchase the goods and services at a given price, which is sold by the producers. Efficient pricing further ensures that consumers pay fair prices for products and producers receive fair compensation for their efforts, leading to balanced allocation of resources. Now, price is a very important aspect in consumer and producer surplus. If we look at the consumer surplus side of things, then a lower price would be a good part for them, because what is happening is, compared to their willingness to pay, as we have learned, they are paying in reality a very less price. But if we go to the other side of things, then for producers a lower price is not a good thing, that reduces the producer welfare, whereas higher price would be a gain for the producers, because that would be much higher than what is their willingness to sell. So these counterintuitive aspects generate equilibrium where both of them are getting some amount of gain in the market. That is what we mean by market efficiency, and we will explore this in detail later. Moving on to the next aspect, that is consumer surplus in efficient market. Consumer surplus, as we have seen, represents the difference between what consumers are willing to pay for a product and what they actually pay. In an efficient market, consumer surplus is optimized as prices align closely with consumer preferences and the perceived value of goods and services. Efficient markets tend to maximize consumer surplus by ensuring that products are priced competitively, promoting consumer choice and preventing monopolistic price outgoing, meaning pure discrimination. Further, producer surplus in efficient markets. Producer surplus refers to the difference between the price producers receive for their goods and the minimum price that they are willing to accept, that is willingness to sell. In efficient markets, producer surplus is also optimized as prices reflect production costs, market demand, and competition. Competitive pressures in efficient markets drive producers to operate efficiently, minimize costs, and innovate, leading to fair balance between producer surplus and consumer benefits. Next is the impact of market efficiency on surplus. Efficient markets enhance both consumers and producer surplus by the following. They ensure fair and competitive pricing, benefiting consumers with lower prices and producers with reasonable profits. Facilitating optimal resource allocation, directing resources to where they are most valued, and maximizing overall welfare is one of the aspects of market efficiency. Promoting innovation and efficiency, encouraging producers to improve quality, reduce costs, and offer innovative products that benefit consumers. Preventing market distortions such as monopolies or price manipulations, which can harm both consumers and producers by reducing competition and distorting surplus distribution. Providing a level of playing field where market participants can make informed decisions based on transparent information, leading to fair outcomes for consumers and producers alike. Next is an example of market efficiency impact. So suppose we look at the consumer electronics market. In an efficient market for consumer electronics, competition among manufacturers leads to competitive pricing because each one wants to attract consumers. No consumer will go to someone who is selling at a higher price. Wide range of product choices and technological innovations that benefit both consumers by getting them latest quality products, high quality products, and producers by attracting more consumers towards them. Next is the market for stocks. That is, in a stock market, efficient stock market ensures that stock prices reflect all available information, preventing investors from exploiting abnormal profits and ensuring fair returns for both buyers and sellers, and avoiding a market crash further. Moving on to another example of agricultural markets, efficient agriculture markets balance the interest of farmers, which are the producers in these markets, and consumers by adjusting price level based on crop yields. Demand supply dynamics and market conditions optimize surplus for both the parties. This is the way in which you analyze any reform or any policy that is brought. That is, whether there is government intervention or not, and if removing government intervention would allow the two agents in the market, that is producers and sellers, to interact with each other, which will in turn lead to allocation of resources and arrive at an outcome which is beneficial to both of them. Moving on to the next concept of total surplus. In evaluating market outcomes, we introduce the concept of a benevolent social planner to establish this concept of total surplus. This benevolent social planner serves as a hypothetical figure aiming to maximize the economic well-being of the society as a whole. The planner's role is similar to that of an all-knowing, all-powerful and well-intentioned dictator. The key question for this planner is whether to leave the market at its natural equilibrium, where buyers and sellers interact freely, or intervene to improve economic welfare. To make this decision, the planner needs a metric for measuring societal economic well-being. And one such measure is total surplus, which combines consumer surplus and producer surplus. Consumer surplus, as we have seen, represents benefit that buyers gain from participating in the market, while producer surplus reflects the benefit received by the sellers. Total surplus therefore captures the overall value created in the market. To grasp this concept better, let's delve into the formulas used to calculate consumer and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is difference between value buyers place on a product expressed as willingness to pay and actual price they pay. On the other hand, producer surplus is the difference between the price received by sellers and the production cost, that is the cost of production, which is again the willingness to sell. When we add consumer and producer surplus together, we get total surplus, which can be simplified to difference between the value to buyers and cost to seller. An efficient allocation of resources in the market maximizes the total surplus, indicating that all potential gains from trade are realized. Inefficiency occurs when resources are not allocated optimally, such as when a good is not produced by the lowest cost seller or not consumed by buyers who value it the most. So, as we have already discussed, we define the consumer surplus using this particular formula, that is value to buyers minus the willingness to pay, or the amount that is actually paid by the buyers. So, consumer surplus is nothing but the willingness to pay, which represents how much a consumer is willing to pay for that good, that is how much they value that good versus the actual price they pay. Similarly, we define producer surplus as the amount received by the sellers, that is the price at which the product was sold versus the minimum acceptable price, that is the willingness to sell. Now, when we add these two, that is consumer surplus to producer surplus, together we obtain total surplus. So, here minus price plus price, this particular part will be removed because minus and plus happens to be 0. What we are left with is value to buyers and cost to sellers, as we had discussed earlier. The amount by which buyers equal the amount received by sellers, so the middle two terms in this expression cancel each other. As a result, we can write the total surplus as value to buyers minus cost to sellers. Efficiency is one aspect of market outcomes that concerns the social planner, as it ensures that economic pie is as large as possible. However, the planner might also consider equality. So here we have talked about efficiency, now we are discussing equality, focusing on how the benefits from trade are distributed among market participants. While this discussion emphasizes efficiency as primary goal, real-world policymakers often balance both efficiency and equality considering the designing policy. Overall, understanding total surplus and its components, consumer and producer surplus, provides insights into the efficiency of market allocations and the potential trade-offs between maximizing economic well-being and ensuring a fair distribution of benefits within society. Let us evaluate market equilibrium with a few graphs and see how these things work out. So, as you can see, figure 1 shows consumer and producer surplus when a market reaches the equilibrium of supply and demand. Consumer and producer surplus in market equilibrium. This graph shows that. Recall that consumer surplus equals the area above the price and under the demand curve, and producer surplus equals the area below the price and above the supply curve. Thus, total area between the supply and demand curves up to the point of equilibrium represents the total surplus in the market. Is this equilibrium allocation of resources efficient though? That is, does it maximize the total surplus? To answer this question, recall that when a market is in equilibrium, the price determines which buyers and sellers participate in the market. Those buyers who value the good more than the price represented by the segment AE on the demand curve choose to buy the good. Buyers who value it less than the price represented by the segment EB do not. Similarly, those sellers whose costs are less than the price, which is represented by the segment CE on the supply curve, which is upward sloping, choose to produce and sell the good. Sellers whose costs are greater than the price, represented by the segment ED, do not. Hence, their willingness to sell is different. These observations lead to two insights about market outcomes. First is, free markets allocate the supply of goods to the buyers who value them most highly, as measured by their willingness to pay. Second, free markets allocate the demand for goods to sellers who can produce them at the lowest costs. Thus, given the quantity produced and sold in the market equilibrium, the social planner cannot increase economic well-being by changing the allocation of consumption among buyers or allocation of production among sellers. But can the social planner raise total economic well-being by increasing or decreasing the quantity of the good? The answer is no. As stated in the third insight about market outcomes, which says free markets produce the quantity of goods that maximizes the sum of consumer and producer surplus. So let us look at figure 2 that illustrates why this is true. The efficiency of the equilibrium quantity. So first is demand and supply curves representing value and cost. The demand curve represents the value that buyers place on good or service. It shows how much buyers are willing to pay at different quantities. The supply curve represents the cost to sellers in producing the good or service. It indicates the minimum price at which the sellers are willing to supply a certain quantity. Below equilibrium quantity, let's assess the point Q1. At any quantity below equilibrium level like Q1 in the graph, the value that the marginal or additional buyer places on the product is higher than the cost to marginal seller to produce it. This difference creates a surplus known as consumer surplus. Increasing the quantity supplied and consumed from below equilibrium to equilibrium level enhances the total surplus because it captures more of this consumer surplus. Now let us look at the other aspect, that is above equilibrium quantity Q2. Conversely, at quantities beyond equilibrium such as Q2, the value to marginal buyer falls below the cost to the marginal seller. This situation leads to a surplus for producers known as producer surplus. Decreasing the quantity supplied and consumed from above equilibrium to the equilibrium level increases total surplus because it adds more of this producer surplus. So, optimizing total surplus at equilibrium. The equilibrium quantity is where supply and demand intersect. At this point, the value to marginal buyer equals the cost to marginal seller, maximizing both consumer and producer surplus. The social planner aiming to maximize total surplus and efficiency would choose this equilibrium quantity. The next point is market efficiency and laissez-faire policy. The combined consumer and producer surplus at equilibrium reflects an efficient allocation of resources. This means the resources are being used in the most beneficial way for society as a whole. The laissez-faire approach derived from the French term leave to do, that is no intervention, hinting towards no government or no benevolent social planners intervention, advocates for minimal interference in market activities from the social planner or the government. It suggests that allowing market forces of supply and demand to determine prices and quantities often leads to efficient outcomes without the need to extensively regulate or intervene in the market. So, in essence, the above explanation highlights how the intersection of or interaction of supply and demand in competitive markets leads to efficient allocation of resources, maximizing the overall benefit to the society. Through consumer and producer surplus, there would not be any other point that would lead to a better outcome other than the outcomes that we have analyzed using the graphs. Society benefits from not needing a planner to intervene directly. While contemplating the ideal scenario of an omniscient, omnipotent, benevolent dictator has its own merits, the reality is that these such figures are rare. Dictators typically lack benevolence, and even if we found one with better intentions, they would still lack vital information. Imagine if our hypothetical social planner attempted to allocate resources efficiently without market forces. This would require knowing the value of goods for every potential buyer and the costs of every potential producer across numerous markets, a nearly impossible task that explains why certain planned economies struggle and certain non-planned economies which are open to free market forces do well. However, with the partnership of Adam Smith's invisible hand of the marketplace, the planner's job becomes manageable. The invisible hand considers all buyers and sellers' information, leading to optimal outcomes based on economic efficiency, making free markets a favored approach among economists for organizing economic activities. Now let us conclude the session by comparing this market efficiency with market failure. Now, is market always efficient? Is there no need for a benevolent social planner, or as we call government in modern days, to intervene or take care of anything? Yes, in the past it was thought of that government should only intervene in the law and order aspects and certain basic aspects of the economy. However, we just saw that if the government wants to intervene in all the aspects, then it has to have complete information of things. Now, market efficiency again is also based on a lot of assumptions. For example, perfectly competitive markets where there are many sellers and many buyers. Now, in this case, this is a very, we can say, impractical assumptions. We have seen many cases where only a few firms are capable of establishing hold on the market such that they pull the markets towards duopoly, monopoly or oligopoly, where we have very few number of sellers. Now, when there are very few number of sellers, they can manipulate prices and sell the goods at a higher price, thus not achieving the maximum total surplus, as we saw from the graph. So, what we can assess from this is that market failures can also occur because these assumptions based on which the market efficiency is constructed, or the concept of market efficiency is constructed, might not be always possible. So, in that case, government intervention is in fact necessary. Thus, in reality, whether a particular economy should only be left to the market forces or there should be government intervention actually depends on the various characteristics that the economy shows. If a particular market can be thought of to be so diverse that it is not possible for the social planner to have complete information about the goods and services from the producers and consumers point of view, then we can say that market economy would be the best case. Whereas if there is some sector where a few companies are actually establishing their hold and pulling the market towards monopoly or duopoly, where they are controlling the majority of the share, not allowing other firms to establish, then we can say government intervention is necessary. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the session.